stories. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jen Durrell.
Well, hey, baby.
Hey, baby.
How is it on planet Jen at the moment? Any stories?
Well, it's, I guess I could tell you one. I don't think I've even shared it with you yet.
Share. That's great.
I'll try to make it simple as possible. You know, I don't get to practice that much with anybody when I try to do my readings. And I did a reading on a friend, and I had a little incident with something that was coming through that I was trying to ignore. And I eventually had to talk about it. And I've consulted my other medium friends about it, but I wasn't sure whether or not it was this person that she was wanting to talk to, or whether or not it was a trickster. So, mind's eye, I could see the person and all shadow here, and the head kept contorting and doing weird things, and I don't even know how to explain it. But I found out that this person, who I was supposedly seeing, had schizophrenia at one time. So that kind of explained a little bit of the head shaking and then the face forming and doing weird stuff. But then at the same time, he was also into the cult, like pretty hardcore. And when this person would talk about whoever I might have been talking with, or whoever's in my mind's eye, let me know that, well, she was telling me a whole bunch of very interesting, secretive things. And then a head came out that was like half goat, half moose or something, like, and then went back in. And so I automatically am like, well, this is a trickster. Someone's trying to jack with me, you know. So I had some difficult times with it, but I spoke with some other mediums, and they told me I handled it well. And they thought it was pretty funny how I automatically put my guard up and was ready to go. Like, you know, you can't scare me kind of thing. But they seem to think that it was actually probably a person and not a trickster. So I can't give you the whole gist, but I'll tell you that later.
You know what I say about that kind of experience.
I
know. That's devil's work, baby.
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk about me for a moment, because I tend to. As I tend to. I've been so busy with MidWest WeirdFest. It's barreling down. It's not as exciting as your very esoteric and strange tale, which I'm going to have to dig into with you more after the show.
Mm-hmm.
But in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, in 2 weekends from now, March 4 to 6 in the Micon Downtown Cinema, we'll be dead in the middle of the 6th annual MidWest WeirdFest, which is loaded with all kinds of strange and fantastic and horrific and paranormal and underground and offbeat films, including one of my favorite films of the festival this year, which I think was because I'm the head of programming of the festival. I think it was the first feature that was submitted to the festival that I watched almost 11 months ago now. And I knew I wanted it instantly. And we've had the guest who we have on tonight on before. He's the director of the film, just an incredibly interesting individual. He's got this wonderful bio that we need to put up in the show notes. And he obsessively desires to take his audience to another realm and show them himself, and show him yourself, show him ourselves as well. And to that end, he pares himself down to the bone marrow for each project. And he does this with his arts collective, Foolish People. Now, I could read more about him, but I'd rather talk to him than just tell you about him myself. But his film LIGHTSHIPS is screening at MidWest WeirdFest this year. And it's this fantastic movie that looks at, I suppose, the UFO contactee experience, but in a very artistic's the wrong term, although it is artistic, but it takes you there itself. When I watched the movie, it resonated with me at a very deep level. I had a genuinely almost an occult experience just by watching it. I felt, as I said in the last show, I felt my brainwaves change and go into another state when I watched this film. And I think we're going to show a trailer. Did you have a trailer of the film ready to show
I
after?
do. Do you want me
Don't
to
play
show
it
it
yet
now or
because
later?
we'll bring the guest on first.
Okay.
Anyway, he's an incredible. He's a filmmaker. He's a writer. He's an artist. He's a theater director. He's a performer, and he's a practicing ritual magician. And he's one of the most interesting people I've ever spoken to, not just on this show, but in life in general. So I'm delighted to welcome back John Harrigan.
What an introduction. Thank you so much.
Oh, greeting, my friend. It's so good to have you back. I've wanted to talk to you again since the last show, which I think was it 11 months ago or something we had you on?
It was about 11 months, yeah. It's good to see you
Wow.
both. Very good to see you both.
It's wonderful to
Good to see you.
to see you as well. It's funny how you're one of those people that there's those people in your life. Now, I'm not somebody who's a medium or a ritual like Jen is, or a ritual magician like you are, but there are some people that come into my life, and whenever they pop up at all, even on my Facebook feed or on the show, there's always these psychic resonances that happen. I remember seeing on my Facebook feed a few months ago, I sent you the message. There was you made a critique of somebody finally working out that art and magic had something to do with each other.
I remember
But
that. I was just flabbergasted. That article just blew me away. It was like it was an art journal. It was an art journal, and they were like, "What if magic and art are just actually the same thing?" And I was like, "Well, welcome to the party. Hello, welcome to the party. Glad to have you." But that's just the art world overall. My experience of it, that they kind of claim like they would be the first to discover that when everyone's been talking about it for so long now.
And the funny thing for me was that exact same day, what arrived at my front door in this big box was this old occult encyclopedia, Man, Myth, and Magic, which was this popular occult encyclopedia of the 70s. And when I opened it just to test one of the volumes, the first page I randomly opened on was art and magic. And then 2 days, not 2 days, 2 hours later, I'm looking at my Facebook feed, and that's that message from you. And then tonight, Jen's showing me her tarot deck and talking about the images on it. And as soon as you get on, you're like, you guys have got to read this book. And it was a book about the tarot. And you didn't know what we were talking about.
No. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's people in your life that you're meant to have in your life and that you resonate with, and you're there to help each other on your journey. So yeah, I'm a big believer in divine providence. There's no coincidence. It's all unfolding as it's meant to unfold.
Now, before we go too far, because I could just talk to you for hours about whatever crossed my mind, we should talk a little bit about Lightships. Now, we did talk about your film Lightships the last time you were on, but because we're screening it in less than 2 weeks now, it screens at Micon Downtown Cinema in 2 weeks.
I can't believe it's going to be screening in Wisconsin at the WeirdFest. But just that alone is mind blowing.
Man, I wish you were here for it. One day we have to have, and we'll talk about something.
I thought about it. I considered it almost as like, is it possible to break barriers with COVID and try and get out there? Yeah. So like I was, nearly just tried to do it.
I don't feel bad. We have guests from Canada who couldn't even come because of COVID restrictions. But why don't we show a trailer of Lightships? Do you have it ready there, Jen, to play?
Yeah, let me.
Yeah, why don't we show a trailer of Lightships, and then we can come back and talk a little bit about that before we drift off into other esoterica. But while Jen's pulling it up, the joys.
It just takes me a second.
There we go.
Oh, here it is. I was going to stop babbling, so let's just
get
roll.
It bigger. Is it going to go full screen?
Did you ever think that you'd end up here? None of us did. The future looks like the end of the world. It is not.
Open your heart, Eve, and receive the treatment this facility offers us all.
Would you go into the treatment room if I told you your son was inside?
The Black Iron Prison has us within its grasp.
I don't believe their lies anymore. I'm getting out. I'm getting out.
The time has come for you to know who you are.
Oh, your mic is
Thank you,
there you
John.
go.
I was just saying I muted it so nobody would hear my breathing over the transmission of the screen. But if it was staggered at all for anybody else, my internet here in the Northwoods is horrible. But go and check out the trailer after the show. It's on YouTube, I think, or Vimeo, or where is it, John?
Yeah. It's on Vimeo and YouTube.
Anyway, let's talk a little bit about Lightships. Can you give the audience just an overview, understanding, extending beyond that trailer of what the film's about?
So the book is an adaptation of the film is an adaptation of a book by Maryann Rada, Remembrance, and I was approached back in 2019 to adapt it into film. At the time, I was like, impossible. It's not. I can't do that. I don't work in that way because, I don't really. Up until that point, I never really taken on anyone else's work and tried to bring it into the form of film, and especially something like a UFO contactee experience. I had to know that it was right. So I read the book, and there's truth within it. It resonated with me, with experiences I've had on my journey as a ritualist and a magician. And so I began the journey of creating the script from the book, which is the lead character Eve, what she experiences as the transmissions are the passages from the book. So we created a way to encapsulate and protect the text, because I do believe that this type of thing, you could easily ruin the frequency of what Maryann is receiving. So I protected it within these passages within the film where Eve has downloads. And then the kind of setting of the place, the hospital, that was really more my idea about how the book had touched me, and from my experience of working with the text. I mean, UFOs have always been a part of my practice in terms of I've had experiences. I believe they are something other than what's being pitched to us at the moment. But so that it's a rich area, and so we shot it, and it's been a blessing in that we've won quite a lot of awards, and we've got to screen at festivals like Your Fest, like MidWest WeirdFest. So it's quite a journey. I got to meet Maryann as well, which was mind blowing.
Your film's had a lot of legs, actually. I've seen it screening since I first watched it 11 months ago or whenever it was. It's screening all over the place. And I like that your film does extend beyond those usual science fiction tropes of the UFO phenomenon. And even watching the trailer, it brought back to mind that there's talk of the Black Iron Prison, which is an idea that I first became aware of in P.K. Dick's Valis. Can you tell us a little bit about 100%.
That? Yeah, I mean, for me, reading Maryann, it was evocative of PKD's Valis, exactly Valis, and in the idea of this non-human intermediary that connects with humanity to change humanity, and the fact that we aren't even in the reality we're supposed to be in right now. This idea of the Black Iron Prison, the idea that time is dead, that we can't move out of time, we're stuck. Keep repeating mistakes. I mean, anyone who's living through history at the moment with what's going on in Ukraine, it's like, it's mind-boggling that we're still making these terrible mistakes, and we don't seem to be evolving as we should do. So I mean, PK Dick is a high watermark for me, and Maryann is similar vein of work for me.
Yeah, I mentioned to you before the show, we were talking a little bit about Christianity and our beliefs. And I was saying how Gnostic Christianity used to be something I was very interested in. I'm still sympathetic to many of the ideas. And I think that was what was so fascinating to me about P.K. Dick, was that he managed to blend those higher, much as you have, those higher spiritual Gnostic ideas with more traditional science fiction tropes and then come out with something more extraordinary. But something else that came to my mind just when we were chatting then was you're also, of course, from the British Isles, and there's a long, deep history of the idea of us existing, as there is in many cultures, but I'm most aware of it in the British Isles, with us existing with other intelligences or other older races, such as the fair folk or the other crowd or the fairies or whatever we want to call them. So before, when you mentioned that you thought perhaps the extraterrestrial intelligence or whatever we think of as an ET intelligence mightn't actually be that science fiction type, delivery that we're used to through Hollywood. Do you tend to pair those ideas together, ideas of older traditions?
100%. I believe that potentially the entities that Maryann is communing with have obviously connected with humanity before, but they are, they've worn many skins, whatever skin suits the person who's interacting with them. Perhaps fairies, perhaps angels. For me, it was Enochian. That was the system of magic that I was able to connect with Maryann's work. They seemed to me like angelic entities in the idea that they were trying to assist us. And I mean, I've met, like no doubt yourself, I've met various things during my career that have presented a certain way that could be something else. And yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of work this last year with the West Country School of Myth, which is a storytelling school. And, landscape and nature is filled with intelligences that are non-ordinary and just basically born of animal or vegetation. And a lot of time we're surrounded with non-ordinary intelligences and we don't even know they're there. So for me, it's just having that idea that you're able to open your heart and connect with things and see what's being communicated, rather than from the dominant viewpoint of, oh, I'm a human, I know all the answers, you can't possibly communicate to me. For me, the sacred and divine is everywhere, in everything. So I'm always looking for that connection, that download. So yeah, absolutely.
Do you think when we, perhaps because we've ignored those older folk traditions, tales of, again, the she or the fair folk or whatever we want to call them, do you think then they try to find other entry points? Like they try to think, we'll come in at this technology, or do you think it's just us transposing that kind of imagery?
No, I do. I think it's both. I think absolutely both to that. I think that we have disrespected God's creation in many ways. And I think that there's a certain amount of hurt contained within nature from how it's been treated, certain amount of hurt contained within the planet, within each other. And I think sometimes that hurt has to be worked through so that you can get to a conversation. Anything you disrespect will have an opinion about you. So if you almost have to meet it on its terms. I mean, for example, in August this year, I'm doing a wilderness vigil, and that's going out into the wild for 4 days to fast on my own without a tent, just tarpaulin and water through the school I'm part of. And it's through actions like that you have really pure connection with other entities, other intelligences. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that we have to communicate on their terms, though. I think we can't come at it from a civilized perspective, or what would be deemed a civilized perspective.
What's your take on, Jen was talking about in the introduction, her experience of doing a reading with somebody, and this entity seemed to be perhaps something that it wasn't. When you were listening to that in the background, did you have any take on that, or what was your feeling?
I did. I thought it was fascinating. Well, first of all, I thought you could straight away tell that Jen has got the chops to do what she's doing. So I was like, that was, because sometimes people talk about it, I hear it a lot, and I've got a really good meter for sensing straight away whether that's the real deal. Same as Jen, I guess, is developing. And yeah, I've had that. I've had experiences where you work with someone and there's something there within them that's either part of them or sitting on top of them that is to fuck with you, and you do have to draw a line. You're like, well, no, you can't fuck with me at all, because this is where I stand and this is my experience, and I'm not something that's going to be pulled along to this dance. So yeah, but it's, all the idea around mental health, how it's been pitched to us, and if you're working with someone who's potentially got mental health issues, God, it's such a complicated thing, because you've got to look at it from the health perspective, but you've also got to look at it from the ancestral perspective, or what's going on their ancestral line and their pain in this domain. It's fascinating. But I think when you're first doing that work and you see something like that happen, it's quite unsettling. I remember my first few occasions, I didn't handle it with a plume. I was like, what the, you have to be almost shifted and terrified, because you've got to have respect for this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So many of my contemporaries end up in hospitals, or not very well, or dead, or suicide, because if you don't approach this work with a certain energy, it will eat you alive. It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It was hard for me because this person that I was reading was trying to contact someone, her father that had passed away. So it was hard for me to like, okay, this is what I'm getting, but I'm not okay with it. But she was okay with it because it made sense to her. Right, so at the same time, I didn't want to like say, oh yeah, sure, that's who that is. But I'm not sure about that. So I'm still not sure about it. But
one of the writers and practitioners that I rate quite highly says that it's Daniel 4, MD. He's got a book called Ancestral Medicine, and one of the takeaways in that book that resonated with me was the idea that you've got ancestors who are digging your grave, and whatever's on them, whether it's other entities attached to them, digging your grave, and your ancestors who are filling the grave back in. So it's like that. Maybe they are contacting their dad, but maybe there's something on their dad, or in their experience of being alive. So there's so much. It's like a puzzle. I think, like being a detective and working it all out, which is part of the fun, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Old Testament talks. You go.
Yeah. Well, the only thing that bothers me with that is that I always feel like I need to help whatever I was seeing.
Yeah.
If it needs to go somewhere else, like you don't want it to be stuck.
Yeah, and you've still got her there in the room with you that you're trying to help.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're trying to deal with two, more than one thing. Yeah, that's the key of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll eventually figure it out.
I was just saying that the Old Testament, I know, talks about the sins of the father being down to the the second or third or fourth generation. But we tend to operate today in such immediacy that we forget about about the history of sin traveling down, but we forget about those cultural traditions that we're a part of as well.
Yeah, I mean, the history of sin, what an immense, beautiful concept that, there could be things, there could be transgressions in your bloodline, in landscape, in towards other people that you're still unpacking. I mean, that to me is, I've worked, as I've said to you before, I've worked various systems, various paradigms, but ancestral ritual is without a doubt one of the most powerful because it's so immediate. It's literally there in your blood. And the moment you even think on it, it changes your reality. And you have to begin doing the work. Whereas, a lot of times people are acting out of pain and suffering and sin, and they don't even know. They're not even aware of that, that going on in their life. I mean, for me, it comes down to two things, and it's prayer and work. And that's what my life's about, prayer and work. I mean, way back in the beginning, things like LIGHTSHIPS, that is a spell. It is a ritual action. But I think that prayer is more important than spells. Like if you're not praying and you're thinking about what magic can I do today, it's like you're fucked and you're going to get eaten alive. So you have to be down on your knees praying that you're on the right path so that you can do the work you're meant to do. Yeah, so I'm a big believer in that.
No, I think I'm obviously somebody who prays regularly, and I think that's healthy for everybody to try to connect to a higher power, above themselves, rather than just try to go hell for leather on their own journey. But when we were talking about ancestral things, then too, it's interesting. I wonder if people who are more attuned, like you or Jen or the person that Jen was doing a reading on today, if somehow they are more aware of that connection that goes backwards. Because I know, Jen, one of your early encounters was you saw something you thought was your past grandfather, and you also saw something I think you thought was a past great grandmother or something. So there seems to be an awareness more with people who are maybe sensitive with those things.
Yeah. Well, I think what I've figured out with some of the people that I've talked to is that my great grandmother, who was the first more of a light positive light that was in my life when I was about 4. She's been with me since then. I mean, I've had euphoric hugs from her and her just whispering really nice things in my ear. And I'm just like, oh my God, don't let go.
It takes you,
It feels
that
so
feeling is, oh my God, doesn't it feel
Yeah.
so good?
Yes,
It's mind
it's
blowing.
great. And I think I've come to the conclusion that I think she's one of my ancestral guides. So that's another process of me trying to figure out all the different guides. But
yeah, I mean, my linking to that idea of feeling that love from ancestors, and not just about the sin. When my dad died when I was 4, and part of my background is that I grew up in a graveyard. In that my mum would every weekend would be at the graveyard tending to my father's grave, and at the time I hated it, but that was my landscape. That was where I learned most of my skills from a young age. Anyway, my grandfather at that time, when my dad died, he immediately stepped up. My mum's father stepped up. He tried to be a father to me, look after me. There was nothing but love. But at the time, it was such a fractured time. I didn't quite understand what he was doing. Then he passed away quite quickly. He had stomach cancer, but he was gone within a few years. However, only like 2 to 3 years ago, from the ancestral work, I work with a landscape locally, and it's my partner in the work what resides there, and my grandfather, during a class that I was teaching, just suddenly presented himself, and it's very similar. It was just beautiful love, connection, same level of love that I had at that time, and it ended being a 4-year-old immediately straight away there. And you can't dispute it because you feel it in your body, and it feels the same. You remember when you were a kid and you feel that same frequency, and a lot of times most people don't have access to that level of love. They we're all walking around in pain and suffering, and we don't have that level of pure expression of love. And once you have it, it takes you back.
Yeah,
I wonder if that disconnection from family takes away some of that as well. I know certainly when I grew up, I was in an oldish suburb, I guess, of Sydney, but it was a suburb that had once been somewhat rural, certainly within probably living memory. And I still had grandparents there and great aunts there, and there was a connection to that space. But I think today so many people, not everybody, because some people still are in those situations, and I think those people should be thankful that they are. But today people tend to disperse, move all around the place like I have now. I'm a long way away from, that family background.
Yeah.
And so I think there is that atomization. And I'm an individualist as well. I think the individual has incredible power and incredible agency and can do all kinds of things. But I think when you remove yourself from those places, or at least if you psychically and intellectually disconnect from your origin space as well, then I think all kinds of things are lost. And I think it must be, do you think it's harder for people to then get any kind of connection with the divine or something more potent if they don't have that connection with their origins? Or
Yeah, I think it comes down to storytelling. I think that when you're disengaged from your family line, and I know, as I am pretty much where we are, we're in a very, it's just me and my wife and my children, and our family live further away. I think you lose access to the stories and the traditions. And I think those stories and just for the fact of like someone who's 70 to 80 years old have had amazing amount of life history and knowledge. And once you don't have that as a resource to dip into it or them to help you, you're flying solo. There's so much of my life is spent now thinking, shit, my mum told me that. And at the time I didn't even acknowledge it. What was I thinking? I'm like, yep, mum was right. And I'm an individualist as well, but there comes a point in your life when you're older and you're like, okay, so that generation did have something truly valuable to offer. And I do think that breaking apart of the family unit is really hard, just on the fact of people raising kids or surviving. You haven't got people around you to support you or help you. So yeah, we're in such a fractured moment in history. One of my great teachers says we're in the underworld right now. And I do think we are in the underworld. I think we're like traveling through the underworld. So it's quite a time to be alive and be human.
Do you think we can pass through it and come out the other end? Or what do you think's our collective type of the future?
I have faith. So as I know you do. And so I do think we can in one way or another. I do believe there is a way through it. I think we're going to have to suffer a lot more. You know, and I know that Maryann believes we're going to get help from what she's communicating with. And, you know, I believe we're going to get help, but I don't know how that's going to happen, whether that's inside us help or out external. But it's a bonkers time. It's just simply bonkers. I mean, just like how even 3 or 4 years ago, for someone to tell you where we are right now, you were like, don't be ridiculous. Don't be silly. That's not going to happen. So, yeah, I do think we're going to get through it. I do think we're going to get through it. I've got faith and hope.
Well, that's good to know. We are in a strange time. I look back now at periods I lived through like they were a golden age. Like I look at the 70s and the 80s and 90s. I was watching old Christmas commercials with my daughter like on YouTube. They had a selection of Christmas commercials from the 80s, like an hour's worth, and I was watching it and going, I didn't know I was living in a golden era, you know, comparatively.
Yeah. And now we're living in like the age of apocalypse or whatever this is. And it's like, what? Even just going out, like I was going to take my wife to a concert, and I was like, do I really want to do that? Do I want to go into London and go where loads of human bodies are and deal with the whole thing of having to test? And it's like, no, I don't think I want to do that. And yet that was something we just do. We'd never even think twice of, and it's no more just doing. Everything requires thought and contemplation. Maybe that's as it should be. So we appreciate what our gifts are, but it is a bit. I see that way too. Even like 5 years ago, it feels like a golden age to today, to where we are.
I wonder though, if all that thinking, like you were saying, I understand the thought process. Like, do I want to go there? Do I have to jump through the hoops? I live rurally, so I've escaped the crazy. I'm literally blessed. Like my daughters never worn a mask.
That's good. That's a blessing. That's a blessing.
And I'm very, and I've had to when I've taken her to a medical appointment, I've worn one because I've had to, but they've never enforced it on her, and I've never, when she's gone to a 6 month kind of thing or whatever. But I wonder if all of this, and we won't go down the political or even the social, but let's talk about how it affects us on a spiritual or on a psychic level, because I know that's something that you and I are primarily concerned with. All of this tearing apart of us socially and tearing apart those kind of ability for us just to commune with our fellow beings without having to jump through those psychological and legal and ritualistic hoops. That has to do something to us at a spiritual level as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think that, I wouldn't posit a reason why this is happening to us, but I can talk to what it's doing to us. And I as we've gone through this whole last 2 years, every step of the way, I'm like, this is a ritual transformational act. I don't know who's exerting it on us, but it's a ritual transformational act. You're taking away certain things you come to depend on, and you're pushing us to our extremes. You're isolating us. It's got all the trappings of a ritual. Now, how we engage with that ritual is up to us. For me, a lot of it was really, really positive. I was ready quite quickly because I could see the signs, and I prepped for it, and so on and so forth, and I endured it. However, someone who's come to rely on all these trappings of society, I can imagine it was just utterly devastating in a way that they're not used to. But that's because I think that we haven't got those ceremonial things anymore in place. We haven't got ceremonies that are important to us. We haven't got ritual. And we're talking about what we were talking about earlier, this idea of family and setting up people to survive. Tribal society had that. We had that. We had a shaman we can go and see in the village and go, what's going on? And they'd be like, well, this is what's happening to us, and you need to prepare this way, because it's the right way to act with politeness. But we just don't have that. So we're like running around like headless chickens. So I think that stripping our voices away and covering our mouths or isolating us, it's a breaking down. And you can either ascend through that experience or you can dive deeper. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people go down deeper into the darkness, and we're seeing others rise up through it. It's the most mad. For a long time, FP worked to create a time where people would ascend and change. I've never seen anything that has done it so instantaneous for everyone. It's mind blowing what's happened.
And how would you, for somebody listening or watching now, what advice would you give them spiritually through these kind of times, or magically or ritualistically? How does somebody approach this, not to survive on a physical level, but to survive on that higher
Spiritual.
plane, or to, yeah, what would you
So,
suggest?
I mean, I think, so I would suggest is that in my belief system that everyone has an essence, a truth, a reason why they're here. So the first thing is you need to get right with that. I think I'm here for a reason and I'm a miracle. For me to exist, an infinitesimal number of things had to occur to put me on planet Earth. So once you realize that, you're like, I've got something to do. And then you have communication between your essence, which is your truth. And that can seem quite airy-fairy and a bit out there, but the easiest way for me to describe it is in biological sense is that if have a decision to make and you've got all these different things happening to you, you're like, what way do I go? What way do I go? If you can connect and just think, well, what is my intuition telling me to do? What is my gut instinct? Because that's a connection between you and the divine. And if you follow that, things tend to work out. So I would connect with your essence, your truth, rather than what society's telling you to do, rather than what your job's telling you to do, what all these different voices are telling you to do that exist up here. It's like connect with your gut at your gut level and follow that. And that really won't take you the wrong way. And then to connect with that, prayer, like we're talking about, prayer every morning. I pray every day. My family does. We get down on our knees every morning and give thanks and gratitude. And I think that if you're grateful and thankful and know you're here to do something and you're willing to work to do that, you're going to be okay because you're protected and looked after. Just in the fact that energetically you're ready for the day ahead. And once you've got that true north, like you're charting a course somewhere, rather than just like, oh my God, I'm in a pandemic. What am I meant to do? How do I survive? You're working to a higher, deeper level. So yeah, that's what I would do. That's what I have been doing.
Yeah, that's words of wisdom. I pray regularly as well. I think I often wonder how people who don't have a belief in something else beyond just the physical, how they manage through times of intense crisis or intense stress, because I know it's only my understanding that there's something beyond this physical reality that has often helped me get through things. But to change the topic a little, what I love Lightships so much. It's such a fantastic film, and I'm so curious about what's coming next. I know you're working on. Can you share some of the other projects with us?
Yeah, I can. So I've just spent 3 days testing equipment. We've got some amazing new kit that we've magically acquired through the work, and it's like beautiful kit. So I've been testing cameras the last 3 days, which has been strange. I'm doing that all alone, and I've chosen to do that alone because I felt like I needed to go through the experience of learning how to use it without being told by experts. Because a lot of times experts will have, do it this way, do it that way. Whereas I want to do it, find a way to do it that feels right for me. So I'm working on a film about ancestors, about ancestral, about how ancestors play out in our lives. And I'm also making the second part of Lightships and the third part of Lightships. So
wow.
It's a trilogy of films. And the second film is a hybrid documentary. So it's got elements that are fictional and elements that are factual. And then the final part of Lightships we're trying to get made is, we're heading towards that. But like anything, making films is an expensive business. That's the aim of the game. So 3 films I'm working on at the moment. It's quite a lot, but exciting.
Does Maryann Rada, the contactee that as we were talking about before, the writings within the film are based on, does she actually appear within?
She's going to. I'm going to hopefully go in April. I'm going to see her and shoot her in where she is, a secret location. So I'm going out to interview her and film her and her family. It's fascinating watching how this has affected Maryann and how this whole time has been in her life, because like yourself, I know I like we were talking about before, people are meant to be in your life. I resonate with you guys. I feel your energy. I feel Maryann's energy, even though Maryann knows I don't 100% see things how she sees it. But seeing a person who deeply cares for the world and humanity undergo this experience of what we've all been going through, for good and bad, has been quite breathtaking. I mean, she's literally like like an oracle, and it's like being in the presence of an oracle, and seeing this affect an oracle, like an old school oracle, it's like breathtaking. It's mind-blowing, it's humbling, it's sad, it gives you hope. So I'm looking forward to seeing her, but I'm quite I feel for her. She's chosen a really particular path, and the path that she's on, that I'm on, that you're on, it's quite a brutal path sometimes to walk the true path. It's hard. It kicks your legs away a few times, teaches you brutal lessons. So yeah, so I'm going to that in April. We're going to see her, hopefully.
Wow. I hope I get to see those films maybe at a future
Yeah,
or for a
I
future
hope so too.
MidWest WeirdFest. Does
definitely.
Maryann still have contacts with the other, or can you talk about that?
Yeah,
at
she
all,
does.
or-
I mean, all the time. I mean, if anyone's interested, you just search out a group, Palladian Renegades, and she's constantly got downloads, and they're constantly communicating with her. But the trouble is with all these type of entities, they work to a different time scale, so they're saying things, and Maryann's doing her best to interpret it, but what they say is like next week, maybe next week in another timeline, or so it's like there's all this stuff going on, and definitely some things are unfolding as they say they will, but it's being an oracle. That's why oracles are so often brutalized and murdered, because if you don't do your prediction and it comes true, what happens? So yeah, she's in constant communication with these other entities, and they're constantly talking to her. So for a long time now, they've been saying they're going to collect her and take her. So that's quite a big thing.
That is a big thing. There's a very significant book, at least academically, called When Prophecy Fails, which is the book that perhaps made the idea of cognitive dissonance and what happens to people in belief situations important to watch what happens when their beliefs are challenged. But the leader of that UFO group, I forget her real name, but her name in the book was Maryann Rada. She made a prophecy that the space people were coming to take them away back in the 1950s. And of course, it didn't happen, or we would know about it. And so as a result, there is that idea of a cognitive dissonance. What happens when the leader of the organization, all the entities tell you we're coming, and then they don't come, and there's this clash of what you believe was going to happen and what did or didn't happen. John Keel spoke about prophecies from entities as well, and
that's perfect. That's the perfect person to cite in this communication with Keel and his connection with that whole, and what you were saying, Jen, about the trickster element. there is an element where, what if part of the lessons is to fuck with you? What if part of what they're trying to teach you is to teach you how they view history and fact and reality is different, and that's Maryann's job, is to kind of piece that together. And I know she does do that. It's not like Maryann is one of those oracles where she says this is going to happen, that's it. She knows they play with her, and she's very open to that and talks about that. She's like, well, this is what they're saying, but I can't. I'm just presenting facts to you. You can take it however you want. So I think you need to have a sense of humor. I think most cult type situations around UFOs, it's when they haven't got a sense of humor. They're like, nope, this is it, and you're going to give me loads of worship. And then, sure enough, 5 years down the line, they're all, they've gone from this world, but not in the way they expect, as it were. So, it's quite a frightening thing. I'm hoping to explore that in the documentary. I'm hoping to look at that element, exactly that idea around belief systems. What happens when beliefs, when if you're too dogmatic, I think sometimes around that stuff, it's so dangerous. It's so dangerous. My relationship with the divine and sacred is so nuanced. It's never based on firm, assured, faith is about, just having hope that things will unfold the way. And I think the moment you're like, no, this is it, that's a terrifying position to be in. I haven't got a clue. I feel like I know less now than I did when I began. So, and I think that's as it should be.
Oh, there's wisdom in that. I think there's wisdom in saying, I've learned so much, I know less now than I did when I started. It's interesting though, when we talk about prophecies that don't come true, or the different timelines, because maybe if we put aside every belief we have about the phenomenon, I'll try to as well. It's difficult for me to do, but I will. Perhaps the communication is saying something different entirely to what we take the signs to mean. For example, I'm reading Jacques Vallée's latest book, Trinity, the Biggest Secret. I'm only, I don't know, 30 pages, and I'm not that far in. And I have real problems with it because Jacques Vallée was one of the writers in the UFO community that I respect the most, much like John Keel, perhaps people like Patrick Harper and Colin Wilson and Ted Holliday also come to mind, people who had a very interesting take and seemed very flexible in the way that they looked at this. Anyway, Vallée's most recent book seems to try to confirm that a UFO crash happened prior to Roswell in 1945 in the New Mexico desert. And traditionally, Vallée had been very dismissive of all of those physical kind of crashes, as am I, and certainly Vallée probably helped influence some of my thinking. But all of that aside, a point Vallée makes in his most recent book is, what if those things aren't crashes? What if they're not unintentional? What if it's a warning, or if it's a gift, or if it's a message, or it means something very different to what we take it to mean? So I think that might apply across the board of a lot of these communications. What we hear and what we might assume it to mean, it might mean something entirely different. It might be speaking a different symbolic language to the one that we're used to.
And most of the people interpreting that language aren't trained in what I would say the way you would need to be trained to interpret non-ordinary language types. So, for example, as we talked about, we've lost all our great schools of I would have a greater faith in an indigenous person communicating to me what a crash about a UFO would mean, rather than a scientist, to be honest with you, because it's based in scientific dogma, which is fine, and I'm not anti-science, but I'm talking about the type of language we need to have is a spiritual language, because anytime I've had connection with this realm, the only way to deal with it is with that pair of glasses on. So yeah, I think maybe he's right around that, but I don't think that to have that level of nuance to understand it takes a lifetime of training. And as we just said, you know less as you go on. So it's fascinating. My only time that I've seen a real UFO craft was in the middle of a massive ritual. And I was walking down the street and I was refuting it all. I was like, this is ridiculous. This can't be my life. And I was like, right, bullshit on the lot of it. Prove to me this is really happening now. I'm done. And I was walking up a hill and I looked up, and sure enough, I saw a red craft do a 90-degree turn and go poof. I was like, okay, well, that's pretty much showing me absolutely, factually, that I'm on the right thing. But what I was dealing with then was I was dealing with the entity known as Lilith, what that means to humanity. So you would never dream that UFOs and Lilith would be simpatico, but to me in that moment it was. So then you look at the idea of UFO crafts. What system are they working in? What are they communicating with us? Because for me, there's something spiritual and other than just simply aliens from another world. Another dimension, perhaps, that's more magical or ritual, or I think that's more in line with what they are. So it's like and then we've got the whole thing of all the disinformation around the subject, and how much of what we're told is just simply to just lead us astray in terms of human trickery. So it's like that's why Keel is so useful. I think Keel absolutely approached it like, well, I don't have a clue, but I'll try and work it out. Yes, I'm being fucked with. Oh my God. That's all you have to come out with. Like, I don't have a clue. Why are they, and then, open to that fact they're messing with you and playing with you. So yeah, I mean, it's deeply exciting, but terrifying too.
I love that your UFO experience was related to an investigation or a ritual you were involved in with Lilith, because I find lots of problems across the paranormal with the way it's approached, whether it's UFO or Bigfoot or ghosts or Loch Ness Monster or whatever. But one of the biggest problems I find is the connections are, from my perspective, the connections are often wrong. So people will say, well, the Tic Tac video shot by the off the Nimitz Navy, vessel, has the same thing to do with crop circles and the same thing to do with alien abductions and it might be, no, those things mightn't be related. The Nimitz incident might be US top secret technology they were testing. And the alien abduction that you think has nothing to do with Bigfoot or Lilith might be connected to Bigfoot and Lilith. So it's where people decide to draw the paradigm or draw the lines within their paradigm of what fits and what doesn't fit. And I think that's something which, even though Keel and even Verlaine, and as you just spoke about it as well, these things are best approached, I think, from a more open or a more we're not sure position. Too often today, I think, because of the dominance of scientism, and we've seen scientism even through the whole COVID thing. Oh, I follow the science.
Absolutely.
People talk about the science like it's the new witch doctor. You can't vary from the science. So the UFOs have to be extraterrestrial, and we can prove it. The Bigfoot has to be an ape man, and we can prove it. The ghost has to be my dead grandmother, and we can prove it. Like, it always has to fit in this scientific paradigm, but I don't think any of this stuff fits in a scientific paradigm.
What if the UFO is ancestral? How about that for an exciting idea? What if, all these things, and again, like, we have to see them through our own sin. What if we can't engage with them until we've worked through that level of transformation, and they require that? So that makes it a whole new level of complication. And then it also proves why we're like, well, why don't we still have an answer? Why aren't we able to video this stuff? Or why is there no proof in this reality? Well, maybe it's because no one exists who's done the work spiritually, internally, to get to a place where it's revealed, absolutely revealed. I mean, what if Bigfoot is your, like my grandfather or someone, just like to come back to this realm, you have to wear a hairy ape suit. I don't know. Maybe that's I love the fact of that. That's how ridiculous it all is. That would make more sense to me, to be honest with you, because it so wants to play a lot of the time. It wants to play and wants to test our assumptions, test our how dogmatic we are. I think you just have to be, the people I work with all the time are saying, if someone comes to you and says, this is the way it is, I have all the answers, you just turn away and walk off the other direction, because they're not the real deal. Because anyone who's doing the work doesn't have a fucking clue, really. Like, Keel it was like grasping at straws and trying to survive the experience. And that, to me, is what it feels like existing in these realms.
There seems to be more honesty there. I mean, obviously, the thing I have the most knowledge on, not experiential, but just book knowledge, is the UFO phenomenon. And I find it fascinating that people believed UFOs were extraterrestrial in the early 50s with zero evidence. Do you know what I mean? And they still believe today with zero evidence. It's interesting how belief can be a wonderful thing because it can give us faith, but belief, as Keel said, can also be the enemy because it can paint pictures that we're unable to see beyond.
Oh, absolutely. And I think even definitely in my work, belief has been the great enemy, in the fact that it's like the more you believe something, it will just wear that skin, and then that becomes problematic. So you have to be formless. And a lot of my work over the last 2 to 3 years is realizing how much that the sacred and divine wants to collaborate with us. And but we can't come at it with our ego and our intent. We have to come almost formless. And it's in that formless energy of wanting to be a servant, and in the energy of the sacred and divine overlapping, that something else is created that's different of both. So it's like, and then that thing in the middle is the interesting thing. That thing, not you, not almost the sacred. It's like the partnership creates something new. And then it's like, you have to think, well, what is that thing that's been created? So it's really deeply, deeply complicated work. And it's taken me 32 years to feel like I'm just about beginning. So I'm like, oh my God, I like, now I understand. I've done the work to get to a place where I can, at the moment, I've just turned 50 recently. I'm like, it feels like I've just literally begun. Oh my God, now I can really get going. And my body's just going suddenly like, oh no, we're going into decline. And maybe that's the answer. The moment we start figuring shit out, we're like, straight away the body's like, switch that one off. He's on his way out now. 20 years. I'm like rushing against time to do what I've got to do while I'm here. You know, it's like, it's exciting.
It's interesting that you can see or you can feel when you watch Lightships, to get back to where we started before we have to say goodbye. You can see in that film, or at least I could feel it, that there was a process or people or a person who had created this movie that understood how to penetrate, not at a conscious level, but at an unconscious or at a subconscious or at a spiritual level. So when you're creating, how do you take the ideas that we've talked about tonight, and I can clearly see you're imbued with it. How do you transform that through the technology of motion pictures to evoke that kind of response, the type of response that it got from me, for example?
Yeah, so it is coming out that it is a collaboration between me and something other than me, and creating space for that to exist. It's looking at the landscape. All my work begins with landscape. So I look at the landscape I'm in, I look at the language of the landscape, and then I begin to make my way through it, as I did with when I first met Maryann. And it's from that realizing I'm on a journey and I'm a detective, and using ritual technology to create a space that it can inhabit, that you hopefully begin to capture stuff on film that is of that realm. And then when you put it together, you present it to others, people are entering into that experience, and then hopefully it can affect them biologically. But having said that, you know, every single one is different. It's a different landscape. So there's no, apart from making sure I'm like on the right track, in that I'm treating this like a ritual. I'm ready to sacrifice everything to the experience. I'm willing to go wherever it needs to take me. It's like, hold on to the ship. Where are we going on this journey? That's what it takes. And it takes, sometimes you're going to fail. I've failed many times. Sometimes you're quite successful. This one feels like one that we've been more successful with. Having said that, someone watching Lightships, and I do warn the viewers at MidWest WeirdFest, you have to park your assumptions at the door and go in and see what journey you're going to have. As I'm going to, when I go out into the wilds of Devon to have I park my assumptions at the beginning of the wood, and you need to do that with Lightships. Don't come into it thinking, oh, I'm going to see a UFO film, it's going to be that. Go on a journey and see what it offers to you ritually, and you might be pleasantly surprised if you're able to do that. But if you come at it like, I want a UFO science fiction film, it will absolutely disappoint you. And you'll be like, what is this thing I'm watching?
Well, I hope people who are listening and in this region do get along to see Lightships at MidWest WeirdFest, which takes place at Mycon Downtown Cinemas in Eau Claire, March 4 to 6. But in the meantime, how can people get a hold of you or follow what you're up to? Like, have you got some websites or some URLs you can throw out?
My website is johnharrigan.com. I'm going to be doing a lot of work through that site over the coming year. In April, we launch a new site that's going to enable people to connect. Then I've got a Substack, johnharrigan.substack.com. And then Foolish People's Work, my company, is foolishpeople.com. And Maryann, if you just search Maryann Rada and Palladium Renegade, you can investigate her books and so on and so forth. But yeah, lots of stuff out there for our work. But before we go tonight, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on again, but also having our film at MidWest WeirdFest. It feels like the perfect festival to end our festival run on. It feels really right that we should end there and then we release the film. So that means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for letting us screen your film. And we got to have you back on before another 11 months evaporates. Yeah, sooner this time than later.
Yeah, I love it.
But until next time, mate, as I know you will, keep it weird.
Yep. Bye-bye. Take care, guys.
Keep it weird.
Bye.
See you, mate.
Thank you for joining us tonight. If you're interested in checking out more episodes, you can find us at talkingweird.com. If you haven't already, please like the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talking Weird Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to Talking Weird. We're available on most podcast platforms and YouTube. And if you do enjoy the show, please leave us a review. Dean and I would really appreciate it. Until then, stay safe.